According to church intake notes dated November 14th, the request came in without urgency. No red flags were marked. No special annotations. Just a single line written in blue ink at the bottom of a standard pastoral assistance form. Family requesting spiritual guidance regarding sudden behavioral changes. The form was filed under domestic concerns, not spiritual emergency. That decision would later be questioned. The house stood at the end of a narrow access road in rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by dormant farmland and leafless trees that bent inward as if listening. Neighbors were distant, separated by acres of unused land and fencing that had not been repaired in years. There were no nearby streetlights. After sunset, the only illumination came from inside the house itself, a pale yellow glow that barely escaped the curtains. The family had lived there for 6 years. Nothing unusual had ever been reported. No police calls. No medical emergencies. No prior requests for clergy intervention. The father, Thomas Bellamy, worked as an insurance claims adjuster. The mother, Elaine, worked part-time at the local library. They had one child, a daughter named Margaret. She was 14 years old. According to school records, Margaret had been an average student. Quiet, polite, no disciplinary history. Teachers described her as attentive, if somewhat withdrawn. She had no history of violent behavior. No prior mental health diagnoses. No reported trauma. The first incident occurred on October 3rd. Elaine Bellamy would later describe it as insignificant at the time. Something easy to dismiss. Margaret had come down for breakfast later than usual. She stood in the kitchen doorway for several seconds without speaking. Her eyes were fixed on the wall above the sink. Elaine asked her what she was looking at. Margaret did not answer. After a pause that lasted long enough to become uncomfortable, Margaret said quietly, "It doesn't like the light." Elaine assumed she was referring to the early morning sun reflecting through the window. She laughed, told Margaret she was going to be late for school, and turned back to the stove. Margaret did not move. When Elaine turned around again, her daughter was still standing in the doorway, her head tilted slightly to the side. "It doesn't like when you pretend it isn't there," Margaret said. Elaine asked her what she meant. Margaret blinked, as if waking from a dream, and asked what was for breakfast. That morning was written off as adolescent moodiness. By the end of the week, the comments had increased. Margaret began speaking to herself in her bedroom late at night. Not loudly. Not in a way that suggested distress. Just quiet conversations, with pauses between sentences, as though she were listening for replies. Thomas confronted her about it one evening. She denied it. She said she had been listening to music, and devices were found in her room. On October 11th, Elaine discovered that Margaret had removed the religious items from her bedroom. A small crucifix given to her at baptism was found wrapped in a towel at the bottom of her closet. A Bible, previously kept on her nightstand, was placed spine down beneath her bed. Elaine asked her why. Margaret said she didn't want them watching her sleep. Elaine asked who they were. Margaret smiled and said, "You already know." That night, Elaine woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of scratching. It was coming from inside the walls. Not rodents. Not the irregular scurrying sound of animals. This was slow, deliberate, as if something were dragging its nails across the interior of the structure, testing it. Thomas heard it too. They lay awake for nearly an hour before it stopped. The next morning, Margaret had shallow cuts on her forearms. They were parallel. Clean. Too evenly spaced to be accidental. Margaret claimed she had scratched herself in her sleep. A pediatrician ruled out allergic reactions. There were no signs of infection. No indication of self-harm behavior beyond the markings themselves. A referral was made for psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist saw Margaret twice. During the first session, she refused to speak. During the second, she asked a single question. "Do you believe something can live inside a person without them knowing?" The psychiatrist documented it as intrusive ideation consistent with early dissociative symptoms. Medication was suggested. Elaine refused. By the third week of October, the house itself had begun to change. Cold spots appeared in hallways where heating vents were fully functional. The family dog refused to enter Margaret's bedroom, whining and clawing at the carpet when dragged near the door. Electrical issues developed with no identifiable source. Lights flickered only when Margaret was present in the room. At dinner one night, Thomas attempted to pray. Margaret began laughing before he finished the first sentence. Not a child's laugh. Not even a mocking one. It was low, controlled, measured. When Thomas stopped speaking, Margaret leaned forward in her chair and whispered, "That name doesn't work here anymore." Thomas slammed his hand on the table and told her to stop. Margaret's expression changed instantly. Confusion replaced amusement. She looked around the table and asked why everyone was staring at her. That evening, Thomas locked his bedroom door for the first time since moving into the house. The following morning, Elaine found dried mud footprints leading from Margaret's bedroom to the back door. They were barefoot. The ground outside was frozen. No mud was found in the yard. The prints ended at the threshold. Elaine contacted the parish office that afternoon. She did not request an exorcism. She asked if a priest could come bless the house. The parish secretary logged the request and forwarded it to the diocesan office under routine pastoral visits. The assignment was given to Father Andrew Keller. Father Keller had been ordained for 17 years. He was known within the diocese as pragmatic, cautious, unemotional. He had assisted in 2 formal exorcism evaluations earlier in his career, neither of which progressed beyond preliminary investigation. He did not believe possession was common. He believed most cases had explanations. On November 2nd, Father Keller arrived at the Bellamy residence at 4:42 p.m. He later noted the time because the sun was already setting. He had brought holy water, a small vial of oil, and a Roman ritual text kept locked in the trunk of his car, more out of protocol than expectation. Elaine greeted him at the door. She looked exhausted. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The air felt thick, stagnant, as though it had not been disturbed in hours. Father Keller reported an immediate sensation of pressure in his ears, similar to altitude change. Margaret was in her room. Thomas insisted she stay there during the blessing. Father Keller agreed. He began in the living room. The first prayer passed without incident. The second prayer did not. As Father Keller spoke the invocation, the temperature dropped sharply. His breath became visible. The candles flickered violently, bending away from the hallway leading to Margaret's room. From behind the closed door, a voice began to hum. It was not Margaret's voice. It was too low, too steady. Father Keller stopped speaking. The humming stopped with him. Silence returned. After a moment, Father Keller continued. The door at the end of the hallway rattled once. Then again. Thomas asked if he should restrain his daughter. Father Keller said no. He finished the blessing in silence. Before leaving, he asked to speak with Margaret privately. Elaine refused. Father Keller did not argue. At 6:03 p.m., he returned to his car and sat for several minutes without turning the engine on. In his personal journal, later obtained through diocesan review, he wrote a single sentence beneath that day's entry. Something in that house is listening. That night, Margaret did not sleep. At 3:11 a.m., Elaine woke to find her daughter standing at the foot of her bed. Margaret's eyes were wide open. She was smiling. "You brought him too early," Margaret said. Elaine screamed. Margaret tilted her head. "He won't come back," she said calmly. "They never do when they hear me speak." Elaine turned on the lamp. Margaret was gone. The bedroom door was still locked. The following morning, Elaine called the parish again. This time, she asked for help. Not a blessing. An intervention. The diocesan office escalated the request. According to procedure, a preliminary evaluation was scheduled. Father Keller was notified. He did not respond. 3 days later, the Bellamys received a call from the diocese informing them that a senior priest with experience in deliverance ministry would be assigned to assess the situation. The name was not given. The appointment was set for November 9th. Until then, the family was instructed to keep Margaret under observation and to avoid any religious provocation. On the evening of November 8th, Thomas found something carved into the wooden frame of Margaret's bedroom door. It had not been there before. The letters were shallow but precise, etched with something sharp. They read, "He knows me." Thomas did not sleep that night. Neither did Margaret. At 6:14 a.m., the Bellamy's phone rang. The caller ID displayed the diocesan office number. Elaine answered. The voice on the other end was not the secretary. It was Father Keller. His voice was strained. He asked if Margaret was awake. Elaine said yes. There was a long pause. Then Father Keller said, "Do not let her hear this." Elaine covered the receiver. Father Keller spoke slowly, carefully. "I was wrong," he said. "And I don't know how to tell you what that means." The line went dead. Less than an hour later, a black sedan turned onto the Bellamy's access road and began the long drive toward the house. Inside, Margaret stood at the living room window, watching it approach. She placed her hand against the glass and whispered a name no one else could hear. The sedan stopped several yards from the house. The engine remained running. From the living room window, Margaret watched as the driver's door opened slowly, deliberately, as if the person inside were weighing the act of stepping out. A man emerged, older than Father Keller, dressed in plain black clerical clothing without insignia. No collar was visible. No cross hung from his neck. Margaret's smile faded. She stepped back from the glass. Inside the house, the air shifted. Elaine would later say it felt like the pressure before a storm, when the world seems to hold its breath. There was a knock at the door. Thomas opened it. The man introduced himself as Father Matthias Rourke. He did not shake hands. He asked to be led inside immediately. Father Rourke moved through the house slowly, his eyes scanning corners, door frames, ceilings. He paused in the hallway leading to Margaret's room. He did not approach the door. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly, then nodded to himself. "She's aware of me," he said quietly. Elaine asked what that meant. Father Rourke looked at her for a long moment before answering. "It means we are late." He asked to speak with both parents in the kitchen. Margaret was instructed to remain in the living room. She complied without protest. The kitchen clock ticked loudly as Father Rourke laid out the process. This was not an exorcism, he explained. Not yet. What he intended to perform was an assessment, a formal evaluation to determine whether further rites were warranted. He emphasized the importance of medical explanations. Thomas interrupted him. "We've done that," he said. "Doctors, psychiatrists, tests. Nothing explains what's happening." Father Rourke nodded, as though he expected that answer. "There are criteria," he said. "Very specific ones. Knowledge the subject could not possess. Aversion to sacred objects. Changes in voice or strength beyond normal capacity." Elaine asked if Margaret met those criteria. Father Rourke did not answer directly. Instead, he asked where Margaret slept. Elaine told him. Father Rourke stood and walked toward the living room. Margaret was seated on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up as he entered. Her eyes locked onto his. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Margaret tilted her head slightly. "You're not the first one who tried to hide his name," she said. Father Rourke stopped walking. "That won't work here," Margaret continued. "You carry it with you. It's loud." Father Rourke exhaled slowly. "Hello, Margaret," he said. "May I sit?" She shrugged. He sat in the armchair opposite her, careful to keep his hands visible. "Do you know why I'm here?" he asked. Margaret smiled faintly. "You're here to see if I'm sick," she said. "Or lying. Or pretending." "Are you?" Father Rourke asked. Margaret considered this. Then she laughed softly. "I don't have to pretend," she said. "You can hear it too. You're just better at ignoring it." Father Rourke asked her if she had been having trouble sleeping. Margaret nodded. "It doesn't sleep," she said. "So I don't either." He asked her what she meant by it. Margaret's smile widened. "You know better than to ask that out loud." Father Rourke reached into his pocket and removed a small vial of holy water. Margaret's eyes flicked to it immediately. Her posture stiffened. He did not open it. He simply held it in his palm. "What happens when you see this?" he asked. Margaret swallowed. "Put it away," she said. "Why?" "Because it hurts," she whispered. Father Rourke leaned forward slightly. "Who does it hurt, Margaret?" Her hands clenched. "You already know," she said sharply. "Stop asking questions you don't want answered." The lights flickered. In the kitchen, Elaine gasped. Father Rourke stood. "That's enough for now," he said calmly. "Thank you for speaking with me." Margaret stood as well. As he turned to leave the room, she spoke again. "You won't finish it," she said. "Not when you hear what it remembers." Father Rourke paused. He asked if Margaret had ever demonstrated knowledge of events or details she could not have learned naturally. Elaine thought of the name Margaret had whispered at the window that morning. She said nothing. Father Rourke chose the guest room at the end of the hallway, directly opposite Margaret's bedroom. He placed a chair against the door and sat in it for several minutes before unpacking. He later wrote that the hallway felt occupied. At 10:37 p.m., the first disturbance occurred. It was not loud. It was not violent. It was a soft knock on Father Rourke's door. 3 taps. Perfectly spaced. He did not respond. The knocking stopped. Minutes passed. Then scratching began. Not at the door. From inside the walls. The same slow, deliberate sound Elaine had described weeks earlier. Father Rourke began to pray quietly. The scratching stopped. A voice whispered from the other side of the door. "Wrong words," it said. Father Rourke stood and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Margaret's bedroom door was closed. He approached it slowly. Before he could knock, Margaret spoke from inside. "You're shaking," she said. He always shook too. Father Rourke asked who she meant. She laughed. "The last one who tried," she said. He didn't last long either. Father Rourke returned to his room and did not sleep. At 2:02 a.m., Elaine woke to a crash. She ran into the hallway. Margaret's bedroom door was open. Furniture was overturned inside. The mattress lay on its side. The window was open despite the cold. Margaret stood barefoot in the center of the room. Her eyes were unfocused. Her lips moved silently. Father Rourke entered moments later. He asked Margaret what had happened. She turned toward him slowly. "It doesn't like to be watched," she said. "It doesn't like witnesses." Elaine asked where Thomas was. Margaret smiled. "He's fine," she said. "He's just praying in the wrong place." They found Thomas in the basement. He was kneeling in front of the water heater, holding a rosary so tightly that the beads had cut into his palms. He was whispering prayers through clenched teeth. When Elaine touched his shoulder, he screamed. Father Rourke placed a hand on Thomas's head and prayed quietly until his breathing slowed. At dawn, Father Rourke made a decision. He contacted the diocese and requested authorization for a minor rite of deliverance. Not an exorcism. A test. Permission was granted at 8:14 a.m. Father Rourke prepared the living room. He instructed Elaine and Thomas to remain seated and silent. Margaret was asked to sit across from him. She complied. As he began the rite, Margaret's posture changed. Her shoulders slumped. Her head drooped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer her own. "You shouldn't have come," it said. Father Rourke continued. The temperature dropped. Margaret's hands clenched the arms of the chair, the wood creaking under her grip. Father Rourke commanded the presence to identify itself. Margaret laughed. "No," it said. "You already know." Father Rourke pressed on. The lights shattered. Glass rained down onto the floor. Elaine screamed. Margaret's head snapped up. Her eyes were black. Not dark. Black. "You don't have the authority," it said. "And you know why." Father Rourke froze. For the first time since arriving, fear crossed his face. Margaret leaned forward. "Ask him," it whispered. "Ask Keller why he stopped." Silence filled the room. Father Rourke lowered his book. He stared at Margaret. "What do you know of Father Keller?" he asked. Margaret smiled slowly. "He heard me confess," it said. And he understood who was listening. Father Rourke stepped back. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Margaret's voice softened. "You're thinking about it," it said. "You're remembering the rule you broke." Father Rourke's hands trembled. Elaine begged him to continue. He did not respond. Margaret tilted her head. "If you say it out loud," it whispered, "it stays." Father Rourke closed the book. The room went silent. Margaret collapsed back into the chair, gasping. Elaine rushed to her. Father Rourke backed away slowly. "I can't," he said hoarsely. Thomas stared at him. "You have to," he said. Father Rourke shook his head. "No," he said. "If I finish it, it won't leave with me." He gathered his things and left the house without another word. Margaret looked up at her parents. Her eyes were normal again. She smiled faintly. "He made the right choice," she said. After Father Rourke left, the house felt larger. Not emptier. Larger. As if the walls had pulled back, creating space for something that no longer needed to hide. Elaine locked the door behind him and leaned against it, shaking. Her legs would not support her weight. Thomas stood in the center of the living room, staring at the chair where Margaret had been sitting. The wooden arms were splintered where her fingers had gripped them. Deep impressions remained, as though pressed by something far stronger than a 14-year-old girl. Margaret sat quietly on the couch now, wrapped in a blanket Elaine had draped around her shoulders. She looked exhausted, pale, smaller than she had in weeks. "I'm hungry," she said softly. Elaine flinched at the sound of her voice. It was Margaret's voice again. They made her soup. They did not speak while she ate. No one mentioned what had happened. No one mentioned Father Rourke's words. No one mentioned the way the room had felt when he closed the book. That night, Thomas slept on the floor outside Margaret's bedroom door. Elaine did not sleep at all. At 1:48 a.m., Margaret began to cry. Elaine rushed to her room. Margaret was sitting upright in bed, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against her ears. "It won't stop," she whispered. "It keeps telling me things." Elaine climbed into bed with her daughter and held her. "What things?" she asked. Margaret hesitated. Then she said, "Things about you." Elaine's breath caught. Margaret squeezed her eyes shut. "It says you don't pray the right way," she said. "It says you stopped believing before I was born." Elaine said nothing. Margaret continued. "It says Dad made a promise he never kept. It says that's why it was allowed in." Elaine felt a chill crawl up her spine. Margaret opened her eyes and looked directly at her mother. "It knows things," she said. "Things I don't even know." Elaine kissed her forehead and told her she was safe. Margaret did not look convinced. By morning, the diocese had left 3 messages on the answering machine. None were from Father Rourke. The voice belonged to an administrative official Elaine had never met. The message was brief. Due to the nature of the reported events, the diocese was suspending further involvement until a formal review could be conducted. All further communication would be delayed. No timeline was given. Thomas smashed the answering machine with his fist. The following days blurred together. Margaret missed school. Elaine took leave from work. Thomas stopped going to the office altogether. They did not tell anyone what was happening. They did not trust themselves to explain it. Margaret's condition fluctuated. Some hours she was lucid, quiet, almost herself again. She apologized repeatedly, even when no one accused her of anything. She asked if Father Rourke was angry with her. She asked if God was angry with her. Other hours she was distant. Her gaze unfocused. Her answers delayed, as if filtered through something else before reaching her mouth. She began to draw. Not pictures. Symbols. "And then you forgot," it continued. "So I listened instead." Thomas shouted Elaine's name. Margaret blinked. Her expression softened. She looked confused. "Dad," she said. "Why are you crying?" Thomas broke down. Later that day, Thomas admitted something he had never told anyone. Years earlier, before Margaret was born, he had been in a car accident. He had been drinking. He lost control on a back road and struck a tree. The car was totaled. He should have died. Trapped in the wreckage, bleeding and alone, he prayed. Not for forgiveness. For survival. He promised that if he lived, he would change. He would listen. He would do what was asked of him. He walked away from the crash with minor injuries. Within a year, he had stopped praying entirely. Margaret listened to the confession in silence. When he finished, she nodded. "That's when it noticed you," she said quietly. Elaine demanded to know what else Margaret was hearing. Margaret hesitated. Then she said, "It says it can't leave on its own." Elaine asked what that meant. "It says it needs permission," Margaret replied. Or an invitation. Elaine's stomach dropped. From who? She asked. Margaret looked at her parents. From you, she said. The temperature in the room dropped. Elaine felt the air thicken. Margaret's posture shifted. Her shoulders straightened. Her eyes darkened. It's getting harder to hold it back, the voice said. You made it strong. Elaine grabbed Margaret's hands. No, she said. You're our daughter. The thing inside Margaret smiled. For now, it said. That evening, Thomas tried to contact Father Keller. He drove to the rectory unannounced. The building was dark. Lights off. Car gone. A neighbor later said Father Keller had left town days earlier without explanation. No forwarding address. No notice. At midnight, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness. Margaret began to scream. Not words. Just sound. A raw, animal noise that seemed to come from deep inside her chest. Elaine and Thomas ran to her room. Margaret was convulsing on the bed, her body arching unnaturally, her limbs rigid. Thomas tried to hold her down. She threw him across the room. He hit the wall hard and collapsed. Elaine screamed for help. Margaret's head snapped toward her. Her eyes were black again. You waited too long, it said. The walls began to shake. A low vibration filled the house, rattling windows, knocking picture frames to the floor. Elaine fell to her knees and prayed. Not the prayers she had memorized as a child. Not the words she barely believed anymore. She prayed out loud, desperately, without structure or polish. She begged. Margaret screamed louder. Then suddenly she went still. The vibration stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Margaret lay limp on the bed, breathing shallowly. Elaine crawled to her side. Margaret, she whispered. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open. They're coming back, she said weakly. Elaine asked who. Margaret swallowed. The ones who know how to finish it, she said. Elaine looked up. The bedroom door was open. A shadow stretched across the hallway floor. Not moving. Waiting. From somewhere deep within the house, a door creaked open. Elaine heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Approaching. Margaret's grip tightened around her mother's hand. They shouldn't have waited, she whispered. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. A voice spoke from the darkness. Low. Familiar. Elaine, it said. It's time we talked about what you invited in. Elaine did not recognize the voice at first. It did not sound threatening. It did not sound angry. It sounded tired. She rose slowly from the bed, keeping one hand on Margaret's arm. Thomas was still unconscious on the floor, breathing shallow but steady. The bedroom light flickered weakly, as if struggling to remain on. Who are you? Elaine asked. The voice answered from the hallway, still unseen. I was sent when the first promise was made, it said. I was supposed to be enough. Elaine stepped closer to the doorway. Margaret whimpered behind her. Don't let it see you, Margaret whispered. It doesn't like witnesses. Elaine ignored her and moved into the hallway. The shadow shifted. A figure stepped forward into the dim light. It was a man, older than Thomas, younger than Father Rourke, dressed plainly. No collar, no visible religious symbols. His face looked ordinary in a way that felt deliberate, as if meant to be easily forgotten. Elaine felt a deep unease she could not explain. You're not a priest, she said. The man nodded. No, he replied. I'm what comes before that. Elaine demanded to know how he got into the house. The man looked down the hallway toward the front door. It was never locked to me, he said. Margaret screamed. Elaine turned back. Her daughter was sitting upright now, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on the man. It told you not to come, Margaret said. It warned you. The man met Margaret's gaze. Yes, he said. It always does. He stepped closer. The temperature dropped instantly. Elaine felt her breath catch in her chest. The man stopped just outside the bedroom. You're doing a poor job of holding it, he said calmly. Margaret's lips curled back. It's stronger now, the thing inside her replied. They fed it. The man glanced at Elaine. I told them not to wait, he said. I told them delay would only deepen the attachment. Elaine shook her head.
I don't know who you are, she said.
But you need to help my daughter. The man's expression softened. That's why I'm here, he said. But I need to know something first. Elaine waited. What did you invite? He asked. Elaine felt her knees weaken. I didn't invite anything, she said. We prayed. We asked for protection. The man shook his head slowly.
No, he said.
Your husband did. And he didn't ask for protection. Margaret laughed. A deep, layered sound that did not belong to a child. He begged, it said. And I listened. The man closed his eyes briefly. When, he asked. Margaret answered. In the dark, it said. Trapped. Bleeding. Alone. Elaine turned toward Thomas on the floor. Her heart pounded. You promised, the thing continued. And promises have weight. The man stepped into the bedroom. Elaine felt something resist him, like thick air pushing back. He spoke without raising his voice. This ends tonight, he said. Margaret's body jerked violently. Her head snapped to the side at an unnatural angle. No, it said. You don't get to finish it. The man reached into his coat. He did not remove a book. He removed a small, worn object wrapped in cloth. Elaine felt an immediate sense of dread. What is that? She asked. The man did not answer. He unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside was a simple wooden symbol, darkened with age. It was not a cross. It was older, cruder. Margaret screamed. The walls shook again. Elaine covered her ears. The man began to speak. Not in Latin. Not in any language Elaine recognized. The sound felt wrong, heavy, as if it pressed directly against her thoughts. Margaret thrashed on the bed, her body arching, her hands clawing at the sheets. You don't have the authority, the thing shouted. You gave it up. The man's voice faltered for the first time. He steadied himself. I never gave it up, he said. I stepped aside. Margaret's laughter returned. And look what happened. Elaine saw fear flash across the man's face. What did you do? She asked. The man did not look at her. I delayed, he said. Just like they did. Margaret's eyes rolled back. Her mouth opened impossibly wide. A sound came out that did not resemble a human voice. Elaine screamed for Thomas. He did not move. The man raised the wooden symbol. The sound cut off instantly. Silence slammed into the room. Margaret collapsed back onto the bed, gasping. The man lowered his hand, shaking. It's bound, he said. Not gone. Elaine rushed to Margaret's side. Her daughter was crying now, softly, weakly. Mom, she whispered. It's angry. The man stepped back. It always is, he said. Elaine demanded to know why he was stopping. The man looked at her with something like regret. Because if I finish it, he said, it doesn't just leave her. Elaine stared at him. What do you mean? He hesitated. It follows the promise, he said. Back to its source. Elaine's breath caught. You mean Thomas? The man nodded. He called it, he said. It answered. Elaine shook her head violently. No, she said. Take it. Take it back. The man's voice dropped. It doesn't work that way, he said. Not anymore. Margaret's breathing slowed. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at Elaine. I don't want Dad to die, she whispered. The man turned away. I can contain it, he said. For a while. Elaine asked how long. The man did not answer. Instead, he rewrapped the wooden symbol and placed it back inside his coat. You'll need to leave this house, he said. Tonight. Elaine looked around. Where do we go? Somewhere it hasn't been invited, he replied. Margaret whimpered. It's still here, she said. It's listening. The man nodded. Yes, he said. It always listens. He moved toward the door. Elaine followed him into the hallway. What happens if we stay? She asked. The man stopped. He did not turn around. Then the promise finishes itself, he said. Elaine packed only what she could carry. Clothes. Shoes. Margaret's drawings, shoved into a bag without looking at them. They carried Thomas to the car. The man watched from the porch. As Elaine helped Margaret into the back seat, her daughter grabbed her arm. Mom, she whispered urgently. It says this isn't over. Elaine looked back at the house. Every light was on. All the windows were glowing. She turned to the man. "Are you coming with us?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I belong here now." Elaine did not understand what he meant. She got into the car. As they drove away, Margaret pressed her face against the window. She stared at the house until it disappeared from view. Only then did she speak again. "It says he won't last," she whispered. "None of them ever do." Elaine drove until the road ended. She did not look back. Behind them, in the darkened house, the man stood alone. The walls creaked softly around him. From somewhere deep within the structure, something moved. Slowly, patiently, waiting for the promise to be remembered. The motel sat off a county road 20 miles south of the house. It was the kind of place people stopped only because there was nowhere else to go. One story. Flickering neon sign. Office window barred with thick metal grating. Elaine parked beneath a burned-out light and shut the engine off, her hands still gripping the steering wheel long after the car went silent. Margaret did not move. Thomas stirred in the passenger seat, groaning softly as consciousness returned. He looked around, confused, then winced as memory rushed back into place. "Where are we?" he asked. Elaine did not answer right away. Margaret spoke instead. "It followed us," she said quietly. Elaine turned sharply. "No," she said. "It can't," he said. "He said it was bound," Margaret replied. "Not gone." Thomas closed his eyes. Inside the motel room, the air smelled of disinfectant and damp carpet. Elaine locked the door, then checked it again. She drew the curtains tight, even though the window looked out onto nothing but weeds and cracked asphalt. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, hugging her knees. For a while, nothing happened. The silence felt unnatural, stretched too thin, like fabric about to tear. Elaine dared to hope. At 2:33 a.m., Margaret sat upright. Her eyes were open, focused. "It's angry with him," she said. Elaine's heart dropped. "With who?" she asked, though she already knew. "The man who stayed," Margaret replied. "It doesn't like being contained." Elaine felt a wave of nausea. "What's it doing?" Thomas asked. Margaret listened, her head tilted slightly. "It's reminding him," she said, over and over. Elaine whispered a prayer. Margaret shook her head. "That won't help him," she said. "He already knows." The motel lights flickered. Margaret flinched. "He's weakening," she whispered. "He waited too long." Elaine wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Sleep," she said. "Please. Just sleep." Margaret's body relaxed slowly. She drifted off within minutes. Elaine did not. At dawn, Margaret woke calm, clear, herself. She ate the breakfast Elaine brought from the motel office. She smiled faintly. She asked when they were going home. Elaine told her they would find somewhere else. Margaret nodded. "That's better," she said. "It doesn't like starting over." They stayed away from the house. Days passed. Then weeks. Margaret improved steadily. The blackouts stopped. The voices faded to whispers, then to nothing at all. She slept through the night. She laughed again. The symbols stopped appearing in her notebooks. Doctors called it acute stress reaction. The diocese never contacted them again. Elaine sometimes thought about the man who stayed behind. She never learned his name. On December 21st, a fire was reported at the Bellamy residence. Electrical malfunction, according to the official report. By the time responders arrived, the house was fully engulfed. No bodies were found. No signs of forced entry. The fire chief noted something unusual in his report. The fire appeared to have started in multiple locations simultaneously, as if the structure had burned from the inside out. Margaret did not react when she heard the news. She only asked one question. "Did anyone finish it?" Elaine said no. Margaret nodded. "That means it's still waiting," she said. Elaine asked what she meant. Margaret looked at her mother. "It keeps what's promised," she said, "even when the house is gone." Elaine did not ask any more questions. Years later, Margaret would move away. She would live a quiet life. No further incidents. No relapses. No voices. But sometimes, late at night, she would wake suddenly with the feeling of being watched. Not from the shadows, not from the dark, but from memory. And somewhere, far from any house or church or road, something that had once been invited would still be listening, waiting for the next promise to be spoken out loud.